April 8, 1943, South Pacific. The night sky burns with streaks of orange and white, tracer fire cutting across the darkness like the tails of falling stars. Aboard the USS Enterprise, the deck is alive with motion. Sailors in oil-stained dungarees sprint between stacks of ammunition, shouting orders drowned out by the rhythmic pounding of anti-aircraft guns. The carrier rocks under the recoil, its steel frame groaning like a wounded beast. Lieutenant Commander Raymond "Red" Collier, chief engineer of the Forward Maintenance Division, crouches behind a blast shield near the stern catapult. His headset crackles. Enemy dive bombers approaching from bearing 160. He wipes salt and sweat from his brow, watching the horizon where faint silhouettes of Aichi D-3A Val bombers dive through clouds like hawks. The sea reflects the chaos above, waves rippling with the glow of burning oil from a destroyer struck minutes earlier. A siren screams. The flight deck trembles. A bomb hits the portside elevator, tearing a hole the size of a truck through the steel plating. Fire blooms instantly, licking the sky. Crewmen rush with hoses, foam sprayers, and bare courage. Collier joins them, dragging a wounded sailor away from the edge. His boots slip on fuel-slick metal. Overhead, another plane explodes mid-air, its flaming debris falling like a meteor shower. When the all-clear finally sounds, the Enterprise is wounded but afloat. The hangar deck smells of smoke and hot metal. Fragments of shrapnel are embedded in the bulkheads like metallic teeth. Mechanics stare silently at the cratered deck, knowing what comes next. Dozens of aircraft need repair. The runway is half ruined. Yet orders are orders. They must be ready to launch sorties by morning. Collier looks over the twisted steel and shakes his head. "We can't keep this up," he mutters. "One more hit and we'll be grounded in the middle of nowhere." That night, as the crew patches the ship under dim red lights, Collier climbs to the observation deck and stares into the black horizon. Dozens of miles away, across the restless Pacific, he knows other carriers are just as battered, each one a floating city that can't afford to rest. But what if they didn't have to return home to rebuild? What if, instead of sailing thousands of miles for repairs, they could bring the dockyard to the war? The idea seems absurd, and yet as he watches sparks fly from the welders below, it feels inevitable. Somewhere in the cold, practical corners of his engineer's mind, the vision begins to take shape. Floating runways, repair platforms, steel cities at sea, a whisper carried on salt wind, the thought that would change naval warfare forever. April 12, 1943. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, Oahu. 4 days after the attack on the Enterprise, Lieutenant Commander Raymond "Red" Collier steps off a jeep and feels the humidity hit like a wet blanket. The air is thick with soot and welding smoke. Giant cranes loom over skeletal hulls of new carriers rising from dry dock. Sparks fly from blowtorches, bright stars against steel ribs. He was flown here on order so sudden he didn't even get to change out of his oil-stained khakis. A Marine corporal guides him through rows of drafting tables crowded with engineers hunched over enormous blueprints. The building smells of graphite and hot metal, the smell of ideas becoming reality. Inside the design annex sits Captain Byron McKee, senior naval architect, tall and wiry, his uniform smudged with pencil marks. Without looking up, he says, "Collier, you're the man who wants to put a shipyard on the ocean." Collier swallows, unsure if McKee is mocking him, but he pulls out his notebook and opens to a page smeared with grease and handwriting. A rectangle. Modular sections. Anchoring pontoons, he sets it on the drafting table. We keep losing days, sometimes weeks, sailing damaged ships back to Pearl. We need floating platforms at the front. Places to land, refuel, repair. We can't win this war if our planes are stuck waiting for a runway to be fixed. McKee raises an eyebrow. Floating airfields. You understand how insane that sounds? Collier nods. Completely, McKee studies the sketch. Engineers nearby slow their work, listening. Collier continues, voice gaining momentum. Modular pontoons, flat tops. We can configure them for anything. Repair decks, machine shops, fuel depots. They'd be towed where needed and stay just behind the carriers. McKee leans over the notebook, tapping a finger. You'd need stability and swells. Reinforcement for aircraft weight. You're talking acres of steel floating on the ocean. Pontoons built from prefabricated steel sections, Collier insists. We already use pontoons to raise sunken ships. Why not flip the idea? Instead of lifting ships out of water, we build platforms on top of it. McKee stops tapping. His expression changes, not disbelief. Recognition. He grabs his slide rule, starts scribbling numbers. If we used standardized 10 by 30-foot pontoons, bolted together like Lego bricks, a younger engineer, Ensign Henry Yamada, leans in. We could attach cranes, arc welders, fuel lines. McKee snaps his fingers. Hell, we could build them any size we want. The room shifts. Engineers start dragging blueprints across the table. Pencils scratch furiously. The energy becomes electric, ideas stacking on ideas. Collier watches the birth of something impossible becoming possible. Over the next hours, the plan evolves. Name: Advance Base Sectional Dock, ABSD, a shipyard that floats. Each unit, a self-contained piece of a much bigger puzzle. Cranes, warehouses, workshops, barracks, mess halls, all bolted atop pontoons. The more they connect, the larger the structure grows. A runway could be added section by section, stretching across the calmest water they can find. It won't just be a floating dock, Collier says. It'll be a floating runway. It's almost midnight by the time McKee rolls up the first completed blueprint sheet. His voice is low, the tone of a man who understands the weight of what he holds. This sheet could change the war. A jeep screeches outside. A courier in a rain-slicked poncho bursts into the room. Urgent dispatch from SyncPack HQ. Admiral Nimitz requests an engineering proposal immediately. McKee and Collier exchange a glance. Collier feels his heartbeat in his ears. They place the blueprints into a tube and rush into the rain. Tires spinning mud as the jeep carries them toward headquarters. Pearl Harbor Command Center. 0054 hours. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz stands over a giant map table, pipe clamped in his teeth. He listens as McKee unrolls the blueprint. Collier speaks with controlled intensity. Sir, we can build floating repair bases and landing decks out of modular steel pontoons, prefabricated and shipped by convoy. These platforms allow fighters and bombers to refuel and launch without returning to Pearl. We'll keep carriers fighting even after being hit. Nimitz studies the drawing for a long moment, smoke curling around his hat brim. How fast? If shipyards prioritize the pontoon units, 60 days for the first operational platform. Nimitz exhales, a slow stream of smoke. The Marines will be jumping island to island soon. We'll need forward air support every inch of the way. Then he says the words that make Collier's knees weak. Approved. Full funding. Priority 1 logistics authorization. He stamps the document. The sound echoes like a gunshot. Build me runways, Nimitz says, and put them where the enemy never expects them, floating in the middle of the Pacific. Outside, rain drums on the roof like distant applause. Collier looks at the blueprint tube in his hand. For the first time since the war began, he feels like he can breathe. The impossible is now inevitable. June 3, 1943, Mare Island Naval Shipyard. San Francisco Bay steel screams when it's torn from the earth. The smell of hot metal, welding slag, and industrial grease hangs thick over the docks as sparks erupt like fireworks from cutting torches. Hundreds of civilian steelworkers, men, women, even teenagers in oversized gloves, build something no one has ever tried before. The world thinks shipyards build ships, but not today. Today, they are building islands. Lieutenant Commander Collier stands on a temporary catwalk overlooking Assembly Bay 4, where towering stacks of steel pontoons rattle under the impact of pneumatic hammers. Each pontoon is a giant steel box, 10 feet tall and 30 feet long, with reinforced ribs, unsinkable modules that can be chained together like building blocks. Below him, Ensign Henry Yamada wipes grease from his glasses, shouting over the machine noise. Section 14 is ready for load testing. Workers guide a crane as it lifts a completed pontoon into a massive water tank. It slams into the water, splashing the catwalk. Collier leans over the railing as the pontoon settles upright. Steady. Stable. It floats perfectly. Yamada slaps the metal side with an open palm. Sir, that's 42 tons of steel sitting in that tank and it floats like a cork. Collier grins despite the fatigue in his bones. 6 weeks. 7-hour sleep cycles. Endless drafts and redesigns, and now the pieces of their dream, floating runways, are reality. Further along the assembly yard, waves, women serving in the Navy, weld seams with precision that astonishes even the veteran shipfitters. One of them, Petty Officer First Class Margaret Ames, flips her visor up and calls to Collier. "Sir, Stringer Frame 17 needs double lattice reinforcement." The Pacific isn't exactly a calm pond, Collier jogs down the gangway and inspects the lattice pattern. She's built into the pontoons. Underside, design modifications that weren't in the original blueprint. "Ames, did you redesign this joint?" "Didn't redesign," she smirks. "Improved," Yamada laughs. "Sir, she's the only reason we're ahead of schedule." Margaret's the steel whisperer. Ames points her welding torch like a conductor's baton. "Then stop talking and start bolting. These islands aren't going to build themselves." By mid-June, they begin to assemble the platform. Pontoons slam into the water one after another. Ka-chunk. 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 And construction crews connect them using steel pins the size of baseball bats. Welders crawl like ants across the lattice while cranes lower prefabricated deck sections made from thick steel plating. The floating runway grows foot by foot, feet wide. Then 90. Then 200 seagulls wheel overhead as if trying to understand why a pier is forming out where no land exists. Collier wipes sweat and grime from his face. He hasn't seen a proper bed in days. McKee joins him, tapping a clipboard. When this reaches 2,000 feet, aircraft can land on it. Collier pictures it. A PBY Catalina or Hellcat fighter circling overhead, lining up for approach, not toward an island, but toward a runway built by human stubbornness. McKee lowers his voice. "Ray, we're not just building docks anymore. We're building cities that float." Collier's response is cut off by a sudden tremor beneath their feet. A boom echoes across the water. Everyone freezes. One pontoon at the far end lists dangerously, a dull metallic groan rising from its seam, the sound of stress under too much weight. Collier bolts to the edge of the catwalk. "Loose the tension cables now." Workers scramble to release the cable winches, but the pontoon continues to tilt. If it goes under, it will drag the entire unfinished runway with it. Ames grabs a bullhorn. "Get that ballast tank open. Now, now, now." Two welders sprint across the unstable pontoon, slipping on wet steel as they crank the valve wheel. Water gushes into the ballast tank. The weight equalizes slowly, painfully. The pontoon levels. Ames exhales shakily. Crisis averted. Collier grips the railing, hands trembling. "We're building something nobody has ever built before," he says softly. "Mistakes are going to try and kill us." Yamada swallows. "Sir, will it hold up in the Pacific?" Collier looks at the horizon beyond the bay where fog smothers the water like a gray blanket. "It has to." July 29th, 1943, Sea Trials, San Francisco Bay. The floating runway, 1,200 feet long now, rests in the water like a steel spine. A Grumman F-6F Hellcat taxis on a temporary track laid on the deck. The pilot gives a thumbs up. Collier stands shoulder to shoulder with McKee, Ames, and Yamada on a tugboat positioned beside the structure. The Hellcat's propeller roars. The plane accelerates. Every eye on the deck is locked on the landing gear. Yamada whispers, "Come on. Come on, the wheels lift." The Hellcat rises into the air, smooth, controlled. The deck crew erupts in cheers. McKee pumps a fist. "We just built a runway without land." The pilot circles back, lining up for landing. The plane touches down, screeches, halts. Perfect. 2 weeks later, in the dead of night, tugs tow the first fully assembled floating dock, ABSD-1, under the Golden Gate Bridge. Ignition flares from the tugboat, exhaust pipes illuminate the massive silhouette. A steel island moving silently toward war. Ames leans on the railing beside Collier. "Think anyone will believe we did this?" He watches the dark expanse of the Pacific swallowing the structure whole. "They will," he says quietly. "When planes start landing where no runway should exist." Off the stern, sparks of welding fade like fireflies. Ahead lies thousands of miles of open ocean, and a war that needs them. October 17th, 1943. Somewhere in the Solomon Sea. Night swallows the horizon. The ocean rolls black and bottomless under a moon shaved down to a sickle. The convoy crawls forward. 3 tugboats, 2 destroyers for escort, and a cargo ship carrying spare pontoons. But the unmistakable centerpiece is the enormous dark shape in tow, a floating airfield, a metal rectangle the length of a battleship, moving through open ocean like a ghost island. Lieutenant Commander Raymond Collier stands on the aft deck of the lead tugboat, wind whipping at his coat. Spray stings his face, but he can't take his eyes off the structure trailing behind them, chains creaking under tension. His floating dream is no longer trapped inside a blueprint. It's out here, in the war. Beside him, Ensign Henry Yamada shouts above the engine roar. Weather says we're heading into a squall. Collier narrows his eyes. The horizon pulses with faint lightning. Waves build, subtle at first, then rougher. Not now. Not yet. They're less than 40 hours from their destination, an anchorage near Espiritu Santo, close enough to the front that pilots can land, refuel, rearm, and launch again, all without any carrier having to withdraw. A mobile base, a floating lifeline. Hours later, wind howls and rain slashes the steel like buckshot. The deck heaves. The pontoons behind them pitch violently, chains groaning against the strain. If a chain snaps, thousands of tons of steel will rip free. On the destroyer escort, signal lamps flash, tension rising, pontoon integrity at risk. Yamada grips the rail. She's twisting too much. The sections weren't designed for open sea like this. Collier's jaw locks. He knows Yamada's right. Pontoons were meant to float in calm harbor waters, not ride out storms like frontline carriers. But war gives no gentle conditions. A sudden wave crashes across the tugboat, drenching both men. One of the sailors on deck screams, pointing aft. Starboard pin bracket's tearing. Collier's boots slip as he charges down the slick deck toward the winch controls. Through sheets of rain, he sees it. One pontoon near the rear corner flexes, metal bending like a bow, threatening to shear the entire platform apart. He grabs the intercom mic, shouting over wind. All tugs, reduce throttle to half. Give her slack. Tugboat engines throttle down and the steel tension cables loosen. The floating runway settles slightly, waves no longer slamming it head-on. But the storm isn't easing. Another wave, taller, darker, rises like a wall. The structure tilts. Yamada, white-knuckled, whispers, "If she rolls, she won't." Collier snaps, though fear claws at him. He lunges for the emergency ballast controls on the pontoon monitor board, a set of manual levers controlling flood valves. The system was only tested twice, never in combat, never in a storm. He slams the lever forward. Ballast tanks flood. Sections sink lower, stabilizing the float. Metal shrieks, chains strain. For a terrifying moment, it seems like everything might tear apart. Then the platform settles. Waves break harmlessly against the submerged pontoons. Yamada looks at him, stunned. "Ray, you just saved the entire structure." Collier doesn't answer. His hands are shaking. He realizes the truth in that moment. They didn't just build a platform. They built a ship disguised as land. October 19th, 1943. Dawn at Espiritu Santo. When the sun finally bleeds over the horizon, it reveals something godlike. The floating runway lies anchored in calm lagoon waters, framed by jagged jungle coastline and distant volcanic peaks. The surface glints with the morning sun, clean, functional, and unreal. Crews swarm the deck installing final equipment: a fuel depot, repair hangars, crane arms, ammunition lockers, temporary control tower. It becomes a base, a functioning outpost. By the afternoon, its unofficial name spreads through the anchorage. The island that wasn't there yesterday. Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 214. The Black Sheep, led by Major Greg Pappy Boyington, taxis a line of F-4U Corsairs onto a nearby carrier. Boyington throws a curious glance toward the structure. What the hell is that thing? Boyington Collier overhears and answers simply, "A runway that follows the war." Boyington stares, first with disbelief, then something else, respect. 12 hours. First landing, a repair team stands ready. Ammunition handlers kneel beside crate stacks. Collier steps onto the deck, helmet on, goggles ready, clipboard tucked under one arm. The deck trembles with the hum of portable generators. The radio crackles. Corsair 12 cleared for landing. Approach from heading 090. Collier watches the horizon, a black speck, growing larger. The Corsair's propeller shears the air, engine snarling as the fighter lines up with the platform, steel instead of earth. Wind gusts. The pilot nudges the stick, correcting for crosswind. The moment stretches. The plane hits the deck, screeching tires, smoke from rubber. The tailhook snags the arrestor wire. The aircraft stops in less than 100 feet. Silence. Then the deck crew erupts into cheers. Boyington steps out of the cockpit, removes his flight helmet and smacks the Corsair's fuselage with an open palm. Hell of a trick, boys. You just built land where God forgot to put some. Collier exhales, overwhelmed. Planes begin lining up to refuel. The war has a new rule now. Carriers no longer have to run. The runway comes to them. By sunset, maintenance crews have serviced 12 fighters and repaired one bomber's bullet-riddled wing. The floating base hums with constant motion. Welders, refuelers, ordnance handlers, navigating officers. The structure that began as a sketch in a notebook now supports full combat operations. And somewhere deep inside, Collier realizes they haven't just changed tactics, they've changed the possibilities of war itself. November 2nd, 1943. The Slot, Solomon Islands. Dusk bleeds into the sea, orange fading to bruised purple. The floating runway hustle has become routine now. Refuel, rearm, repair, launch. The crews know their roles. Pilots trust the steel beneath their landing gear. But the enemy has noticed. And tonight, the runway isn't just supporting the fight. It is the target. On the command deck of the floating base, Lieutenant Commander Raymond Collier scans a radar repeater scope bolted into the temporary control shack. The device is new, crude, flickering, but it's enough to show a cluster of moving dots on the northern sweep. Fast, low, no. Transponder Japanese torpedo bombers. He feels a cold weight slide into the pit of his stomach. Ensign Henry Yamada confirms the reading. 12 bogeys. Closing fast. Bearings 027. Collier slams a fist against the steel railing. They're miles from traditional defenses. No concrete bunker to hide behind. No reinforced hangar roof. They built a runway. They didn't build a fortress. Below, the engineers and deckhands, mechanics, welders, riggers aren't soldiers. Most have never fired a weapon in anger, but when the call to battle stations echoes across the steel platform, every man and woman drops what they're doing. Cranes stop mid-swing. Welding torches go dark. Petty Officer Margaret Ames slides down a ladder, grease on her cheek, grabs a 50 cal mount and yanks the charging handle back. Her voice rings out steady. This island stands. Understand? We hold. Collier sprints to the radio shack. Signal destroyer escort, enemy inbound, torpedo vector. We need overlapping anti-air cover. Static answers. Then a clipped reply, acknowledged. Guns hot. Out on the water, the destroyer's silhouette turns. Gun batteries already elevating. The floating runway has never been tested under direct attack. Tonight, it will be baptized by fire. Minutes later, shapes appear on the horizon, dark specks against dying light. Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, engines snarling like wolves. They drop to wave-top height, skimming the water. Their target is obvious. Yamada's voice trembles. They're coming straight for the pontoons, because the Japanese understand you don't need to destroy the planes, or the fuel, or the crew. Just sink the steel island and everything on it dies. Air raid siren. Deck lights kill. Guns manned. Collier takes a position beside Ames at a starboard gun mount. The first wave of bombers descends. Tracer fire erupts from the destroyer, orange streaks clawing upward. Ames opens up on the lead bomber, 50 cal thundering against her shoulder. Come on, come on! Her stream of fire rips across the Kate's fuselage. Flames bloom from its engine. The bomber skims the surface, wingtip, catches water, spins like a skipping stone, and disintegrates. Screams from sailors and welders echo across the deck. Collier swings to engage the next. The second Kate drops its torpedo. A silver streak glides just beneath the water's surface, slicing toward the pontoons. Yamada shouts from the command deck, "Starboard flood, do it now." Collier scrambles to the manual ballast levers. He slams one down with both hands. A deep rumble shudders through the platform as ballast tanks flood. The entire runway sinks, just inches, but enough. The torpedo passes under the pontoons, gasps, cheers. Ames laughs breathlessly. You mad genius. You just made the runway duck. There's no time to celebrate. A third bomber makes its run, this one already dropping fish. This torpedo has perfect angle. Collier looks around. No lever left to pull, no trick. Brace. Suddenly a roar overhead. Out of the dark sky drops an F-4U Corsair. Big radial engine howling, wings dipping. It rakes the bomber with machine gun fire. The Kate explodes mid-air, debris raining sparks into the water. The Corsair buzzes the deck. Collier recognizes the pilot. Major Greg Pappy Boyington. "You boys looked bored," Boyington radios. "Thought I'd crash the party." Cheers erupt, mixing with adrenaline and disbelief. But more bombers approach. Boyington banks hard, leads them away. Corsair after Corsair lifts off and joins him. Within seconds, the night sky becomes a brutal dance of gunfire and evasion. Flames arc across the dark. One fighter goes down in smoke. Another scores a kill. Down below, Ames and the deck crew reload ammo belts with shaking hands. Collier wipes grime and sweat from his eyes. Everything he helped create, every pontoon, every weld, every bolt rests on surviving the next 60 seconds. One final bomber screams toward the platform. "Point defense! Fire everything!" Guns roar. Sparks shower from steel. The bomber loses an engine but still comes on, barely above the water. It is not firing, not retreating. It is trying to crash into the runway. Ames fires until her barrel glows red. "Go down, damn you." The Kate hits the wave crest, flips, and slams into the sea 50 yards off the bow. Spray drenches everyone. Silence follows. Slowly, painfully, the floating runway stabilizes. No torpedo hit. No pontoon lost. No island sunk. The engineers, non-combatants, just defended their creation like warriors. Collier looks at Ames, Yamada, the crew, faces smeared with soot and seawater. "We held." Ames nods, exhausted. "Yeah, but they'll be back." Collier's eyes shift toward the dark horizon where wreckage still burns. "And we'll still be here." The floating runway, scarred, dented, drenched in battle, remains still functioning. Still serving fighters. Still holding the line. The U.S. Navy has done the unthinkable. They have made land immune to invasion. January 31st, 1944. Ulithi Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Before dawn, the sea is mirror still. Moonlight drifts across the water like silver paint. At the center of the lagoon lies something that does not belong. A chain of floating docks and runways stretching nearly half a mile. To approaching pilots, it looks like a highway dropped from the sky. Steel rectangles stitched together. Cranes jutting upward like trees on some unnatural island. Only those who serve on it know the truth. This is not an island. It is a machine. Thousands of men live and work here. Sailors, engineers, welders, machinists. They sleep in bunks welded onto pontoons, eat in makeshift mess halls, and work under floodlights that turn night into bleached, ghostly day. Above them, inside a temporary control shack on the deck, Lieutenant Commander Raymond Collier stands with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Weeks of repairs and expansion have transformed the structure from a floating runway into a massive forward base. Fuel depots, radar, workshops, barracks, and even a chapel bolted to steel. It isn't just one floating dock anymore. It's an archipelago of steel. 6 ABSDs now exist across the Pacific, some repairing submarines, others hosting fighters. Here at Ulithi, the biggest of them waits for the next phase of the island-hopping campaign, the invasion of the Marianas. Collier watches as crews complete final checks on a new innovation bolted to the flight deck. A portable catapult launcher built directly onto the floating runway. With land so scarce, the engineers realized the floating runways could not only receive aircraft, they could launch them. Ensign Henry Yamada jogs up the ladder and joins him, breath frosting in the cold morning air. "Ray, we've got confirmation." "Today's test is a go," Collier nods. "Pilot briefed?" "Briefed and impatient. Says he wants to yeet a Hellcat into the next time zone." His words. Collier cracks a tired smile. "Then let's give him a runway." 5:47 hours. Flight deck floodlights click off as the rising sun spills orange fire across the deck. Engines rumble to life. Crew members hold down their helmets as bitter wind sweeps across the steel. A Grumman F-6F Hellcat sits latched to the catapult rig, wings folded like the arms of a praying mantis. The pilot, Lieutenant Jack Swede Carlson, peers out from the open cockpit. "I still can't believe I'm about to launch off a box floating in the ocean." Collier steps up to the edge of the catapult track. "You're not launching off a box, Swede, you're launching off the future." Carlson grins. "Hell of a future," wings unfold. Locking pins slide into place. The catapult officer signals readiness. Collier glances down the length of the runway out across the lagoon. The floating airfield is so stable now, so precisely ballasted, that it feels solid beneath his boots. The catapult fires. The Hellcat screams forward, acceleration slamming Carlson into his seat. A rooster tail of spray erupts behind the runway. Then he's airborne, perfect climb, perfect angle. Cheers erupt across the platform. Carlson's voice crackles over the radio. You boys just built a runway without a country. Hours. Emergency incoming. The celebration lasts only minutes. A frantic radio burst cuts through the noise. Mayday, mayday. This is Eagle 4. Taking fire, engine hit, request emergency landing. Collier races to the tower. Outside, welders drop tools and sprint toward safety rails. Yamada grabs binoculars. A broken Avenger torpedo bomber limps toward them from the northwest. Smoke trails behind it like a black tail. One landing gear hangs useless and twisted. The pilot is fighting the controls with both hands. Collier slams the intercom. Clear the deck. Crash crew to stations. Ames appears out of nowhere, still wearing welding gloves. I'll handle the aft deck fire hoses. Collier nods. No time to argue. The Avenger descends hard. Skimming so low the prop wash sweeps loose tools sliding across the runway. Screech. Metal. Sparks. The missing landing gear slams into the deck. The aircraft skids sideways, tailhook missing the wires, fuselage spinning. Collier braces for the explosion. Instead, the bomber shudders. Scrapes. And stops just feet from the fuel depot. Silence. Then the cockpit canopy pops open. The pilot, bloodied, dazed, raises a hand weakly. Ames leaps onto the wing and pulls him out. Got you. You're home. Not land, not an island. But home. Later, at sunset, Collier walks the length of the platform. The air smells of oil and sea salt. The deck vibrates under generators. Night crew welders throw off golden sparks in the gloom. He steps to the edge of the pontoon lane and looks down. The sea beneath is calm, reflecting the twilight sky. There is no boundary between water and structure, only an illusion of land where none exists. Yamada joins him, leaning against the rail. When the war's over, what happens to this place? Collier watches a Corsair taxi past, catching the amber glow of the lamps. Maybe they tow it home. Maybe they scrap it. He pauses. But for now, we put airfields where there are no shores. Yamada nods slowly. Runways wherever we need them. Exactly. Collier lifts his eyes to the flight deck where mechanics service fighters for tomorrow's sortie. Men walk across steel instead of sand. Steel that floats because people like them refuse to accept the limits of geography. Out here, land is not found. It is made. The floating runway, once an absurd sketch in a grease-stained notebook, has become the keystone of Pacific victory. Because wherever the war moves, the runway moves with it. Collier turns toward the sound of another Corsair spooling up. Engines roar. Tires roll. The fighter leaps into the air. The sky takes him. The steel island remains, and the sea, once unstoppable, now yields not just to ships, but to runways. The U.S. Navy changed the ocean from a battlefield into a base.